Story 1. I have a story about this. I was vacationing in Mexico a couple of decades ago. My wife and I went to a national park to see the wildlife. It was awesome. There we encountered a Mexican couple who were also vacationing and got to talking. We had a lot in common. They were young professionals who had moved to Mexico City and were doing very well. The guy mentioned that as part of their vacation, they had visited the tiny village from which his grandfather came. This village was very remote and apparently had an ancient tradition of making mezcal, for which it was locally famous. The mezcal made there was full of flavor, nothing like the bland stuff sold for export. As we talked, we walked back to the car park and our rented car. The guy was getting enthusiastic about this ancestral spirit and finally invited us to try some. He had a small wooden barrel in his trunk, which he was taking back to Mexico City. After that lead up, how could we refuse? We gladly agreed to try some. He produced plastic cups and poured a generous amount into each. I took a sip. My goodness, I've never in my life tasted anything quite so foul. It was like a dying ogre's urine, with a hint of rotten skunk and an aftertaste of burning tires. It was also extremely strong, must have been 60% alcohol. Meanwhile, the couple were all smiles. It's good, isn't it? I bet you've never had anything like it. Well, we could truthfully say we'd never had anything like it. We both struggled to maintain composure and not spit the vile concoction onto the ground. I forced myself to express superlatives about how unique and interesting it was. They meant well, it was important to them, and it would hardly be polite to say it was horrible. Fortunately, the high alcohol content gave us an excuse to refuse a second helping, saying, "We have a long drive ahead, not used to the strong stuff," allowing us to escape with no hurt feelings. Story 2. I don't know if this counts, but one time I ate some of what I thought was yogurt, but it was actually spoiled milk. Story 3. I love sushi, but the sea urchin variety makes me want to instantly retch. My body rejected it as soon as it hit my tongue. Story 4. I had a type of masala milk that wasn't exactly sweet. The spicy milk was one of the more intense things on my stomach. Story 5. A protein shake my gym friend made from raw eggs, kale, tuna water, and something he called ancient Himalayan fungus. Tasted like a sewer rat's final breath mixed with betrayal. I felt I aged 3 years and saw my ancestors shaking their heads. Story 6. Not the worst, but I have to take a moment to talk about matcha. Why do people want to drink lawn clippings? Story 7. That smoothie from the health store, containing kale, spirulina, and other trendy green powders, tasted like grass clippings mixed with dirt, but they say it's good for you. Story 8. I saw something on my stove that looked like a drop of caramel. I had made caramel earlier, but it turned out to be a drop of old grease. It was disgusting. Story 9. Squid ink mayonnaise. It tasted like highly concentrated green beans. I like green beans, but not in high concentration and not to dip French fries in. Story 10. I'm quite adventurous. I'd say the worst has been surströmming, but it's not as devastating as people on the internet make it seem. I opened it underwater, and the smell was bad, but not so repulsive. I had read that the taste was better than the smell, but it tastes just as it smells. Sulfur, ammonia, metallic, and salty. I ate it the proper way on bread with potatoes, onions, sour cream, and tomatoes, but it's definitely an acquired taste that I'm not interested in acquiring. Technically, I would rank Gruyere cheese as worse than surströmming. If I had to choose a dish to eat, gun to my head, between the two, I would choose surströmming. But I guess that's just my taste. Story 11. My wife and I would join several friends at a local pub regularly. We always reserved a whole section for ourselves and had the same waitress every time. This waitress invited most of our group to her wedding reception, which featured an open bar. However, they used terrible quality alcohol, which was worse than bottom shelf. It was more like basement shelf. I didn't even finish the one drink I had. Everyone was saying the same thing. I suppose that's one way to keep the bar tab down. Story 12. Yesterday, I was improvising and added whatever I could find to make a soup. All I had were carrots and parsnips, so I chopped them up and added them to the pot with some bone broth. While looking for something else to add, I found an old can of mackerel. I opened it and added the 3 meaty chunks of fish to the pot. I sprinkled in a few spices to try to enhance the soup's aroma and flavor. A few minutes later, the carrots and parsnips were soft, and the soup was ready. I ended up eating most of the mackerel simply because I was hungry, and picking out the bones kept me occupied during my lunch break. The rest went into the compost pile. Everything ended up tasting like a mix of fish and wet ash. I would not make it again. Story 13. Drinking a full 4 bag was quite unpleasant. After finishing a training exercise, we were supposed to practice applying IVs on each other. Unfortunately, the corpsman ran out of needles, so the command decided that those of us who did not receive an 4 needed to drink it instead. I have a decent gag reflex, but the salt content in the bags almost made me vomit several times, and some people did. Story 14. A few years ago, I was prescribed antibiotics. One of the side effects may include nausea. I took a pill and immediately my head felt wrong. I made my way to the bathroom. It must have been about 30 seconds when my body reacted strongly, and everything came out all at once, including the whole undigested tablet. Once I cleaned myself up, I actually felt pretty good, but I needed more antibiotics. Story 15. Sweet corn soda tastes exactly as advertised, which is unsettling. However, the flavor of carbonated corn is unappealing. Story 16. I purchased a juicer and started experimenting with different fruits and vegetables. I made some potato juice, and I kid you not, it tasted like drinking dirt. It was absolutely disgusting. Story 17. Guz is meant to be a cherry beer, but it tastes like stomach acid. A fresh, uncured black olive was also quite unpleasant. It is extremely bitter, and the taste lingers for about 10 minutes. Story 18. I ordered a double cheeseburger at McDonald's once. It looked perfectly normal, but when I took a bite, the bottom of the bun was completely covered in mold, and that is all that touched my tongue. By far, it was the worst tasting thing I've ever experienced. Story 19. Ric Flair created Woo energy drinks. I tried one and it tasted like carbonated cough medicine. In addition to the unpleasant taste, I had to leave work early because the mushrooms in it made me sick. Story 20. At the World of Coke in Atlanta, you can sample products from around the world. There was a soda from a Middle Eastern country that tasted like a carbonated mud puddle. Story 21. Recently, I tried durian candy. Durian is a fruit banned in many parts of Thailand due to its rancid smell. The candy was not much better. It tasted like rotten onions or rotten cheese. It was hard to pinpoint the exact flavor, but no thanks. Story 22. Iced tea. It tasted like someone boiled Indiana Jones' shoes after he had just finished an adventure in the hot, steamy jungle and hadn't bathed for a month, resulting in a foot fungus. The water from the boiled shoes was poured into a cup, ice was added, and someone claimed it was iced tea. Nasty stuff. Story 23. I went to a beachside restaurant known for its drinks. I asked the server for a recommendation, and he suggested a popular option. I tried it and instantly regretted my choice. It tasted like someone melted a craft store during Christmas and added cloves and cinnamon. I nearly gagged. When the server returned to ask how it was, I told him I didn't expect to have Christmas in my mouth. He offered to replace it, but nothing could erase that taste. Never again. Story 24. Supermalt. I don't remember what it tasted like, but I discarded it before I even got back in my car. Story 25. Texture is my worst enemy as someone with sensory issues. I really want to like cottage cheese because of its high protein and low calorie properties, but it made me feel nauseous the one time I tried it. Something about the salty, crumbly texture was absolutely disgusting to me. Story 26. This dietary supplement called Zija tasted like what I would imagine a sickening open sore on a dying opossum would smell like. Story 27. There was a specific cheese in France, but I can't remember what animal it came from. All I know is it did not taste like something I should be eating. It was the strongest taste I've ever encountered in my life. It tasted like a mix of vomit and the smell of industrial chemicals like motor oil and gasoline, and it lingered. I've never gotten drunk faster after that because of the amount of wine I consumed to try to get rid of the taste of the cheese. It was beyond repulsive. Story 28. I told an ex that I loved my grandmother's homemade chicken pot pie, so she tried to make one. I could not swallow a single bite. It was as though she had seasoned it with potpourri. I had to spit it out and could still taste it hours later. I have no idea what spice she used to make it taste like that. Some friends said I should have grinned and bared it. I disagreed. I didn't want her to make it again. Story 29. Food. Sauerkraut has a sour taste and an undesirable texture. Drink. Any brown liquor has a strong taste that resembles gasoline and is unpleasant. Story 30. Haggis egg rolls at a Scottish bar were an unpleasant surprise. The flavors were bitter and sour with seasonings that were difficult to describe. I am usually open to trying new foods, but the combination of haggis seasoning and the oil from the egg roll wrapper was overwhelming. It was truly horrendous. Story 31. When I was around 10 years old, I never wanted to eat any deli meat. One day, when no one was around, I decided to give it a try. I went into the fridge and ate a piece of turkey. It was slimy and had a bit of a smell, but I thought, that's turkey. It was years before I tried deli meat again, and sometime later I realized the turkey I had eaten was expired. I missed out on years of prosciutto. Story 32. The worst thing I ever ate was liver when I was a child. I ate it once and still remember it tasting bitter and chalky. No amount of breading, gravy, or onions masked the flavor. Story 33. Once, I was sitting outside listening to music late at night. I reached over for my glass, not realizing that a slug had crawled onto the rim, and into my mouth it went. It was like sticky antimatter. The slick mucus was nearly impossible to remove from my mouth and off my tongue. I ended up rinsing my mouth out with rubbing alcohol and brushing constantly for 15 minutes. If they feed you in hell, it's slugs. Story 34. Stinky tofu. I tried a tiny bit, and it was an automatic no. I can't really describe the taste, just that it was foul. Maybe it tastes like it smells? Story 35. Fernet Branca is a herbal liqueur from Italy. My dad convinced me to try some. Tastes like bitterness or earwax. Story 36. Bitter melon. My friend warned us that we would not like it, but we were charmed by the name. Tasted like aspirin. Story 37. When I was 12, I visited my family with my father and younger brother, and we traveled overseas since my parents were immigrants. British Airways offered us a choice of chicken curry or vegan pasta. My brother and I both chose pasta. My brother received a nice penne in a tomato-based sauce, while I got a stringy eggplant lasagna that tasted unpleasant. I ended up eating half of my father's curry because I could not manage more than 2 bites of that lasagna. Story 38. Gold Star beer. I got it from a bar in New York. It was genuinely the worst beer I have ever tasted. Tasted skunky and foul. The bartender told me that he received that complaint frequently from people trying it for the first time. It was a waste of $7. I enjoy beer, but that one made me spit it out after the first sip. Story 39. I was working in Abuja, Nigeria back in 1998, and we were staying in a luxury hotel there. My friend ordered a cheeseburger at the restaurant. I remember he bit into it and looked at me as if a zombie had just taken a dump in his mouth. He said, "Please tell me I'm not losing my mind." He handed it to me, and I took a tiny bite and nearly passed out. It was so horrid. Tasted like I would suspect surströmming would taste. It was the worst tasting thing I had ever experienced in my life. Story 40. Diabetic cough syrup. I am not diabetic, but it's all they had. Imagine how horrid cough syrup tastes already. Now take away any sweetener it might have. It is worse than the potion Harry Potter had to drink for fixing bones. Story 41. Oyster dressing. But hear me out, I didn't realize it was oyster dressing. I thought it was the usual turkey stuffing, so I was unprepared for that taste. Story 42. Chicken liver and buttered pasta that I accidentally made with extremely freezer-burned butter. Shockingly, my mom couldn't taste it. I was frustrated. Story 43. During a visit to family in England, I had a BLT at a restaurant along the way to a tourist attraction. The bacon was burnt to a crisp, the lettuce was wilted and soggy, and the tomato was practically transparent and mealy. To top it off, there was an excessive amount of mayonnaise slathered on the bread, dripping down the sides as I ate. I have enjoyed plenty of great food in England during my visits, including traditional homemade dishes and offerings from various restaurants. I believe England doesn't generally deserve the reputation it has for food. However, I still shudder when I think of that sandwich. It was the worst meal I've ever had. Story 44. I didn't try it. I just opened the can of surströmming, fermented herring. It smelled like rotting flesh, and those who dared to taste it said it tasted as they imagined rotting flesh would taste. Story 45. Bean Boozled dog food flavored jelly bean. I've never tasted actual dog food, but it cannot be worse than this. Story 46. An Albanian I knew kept talking about a liquor from his home country. He built it up so much that I was expecting it to be the best hard liquor I had ever tried. When he finally imported some for us to try together, it tasted like 100 proof aspirin. Story 47. Surströmming is canned fermented fish from Sweden. Opening it at home may leave you with an overwhelming urge to vomit. The odor is more pungent than that of a rotting animal carcass and seems to linger indefinitely, making it an absolutely traumatic experience. Story 48. I was once invited to an Indian restaurant while visiting San Francisco, and I must say I wouldn't try it again. Unfortunately, I didn't like the food, and the drink I ordered was unpleasant. I don't know what it was called, but I would never order it again. It tasted like soda with a powder that had a foul odor, reminiscent of boiled eggs, but much worse. Story 49. Have you ever experienced something unimaginable? I haven't either, but I can imagine it would be quite disturbing. Story 50. Yak milk tea with yak butter at the bazaar in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. Tasted unpleasant. Took 2 days to get the taste out of my mouth. Story 51. A scorpion in Vietnam had a terrible texture and tasted like rotten nuts, if such a thing exists. It was disgusting. I also tried guinea pig in Peru and Ecuador, but I wouldn't recommend it. Story 52. Went out for sushi in Mexico. The owners brought us local fish to try, probably mackerel. Tasted oily. Story 53. Durian tasted like caramel mixed with unpleasant flavors. Lobster ravioli was served at a work dinner in Kansas City. It was the appetizer, and I didn't want to be rude. It was clearly not fresh lobster, which is expected in Kansas City. I'm not a fan of seafood, but I can somewhat tolerate fresh options. Story 54. The first time I had mogu mogu lychee, I was unaware it contained chunks. That was one of the most surprising moments I have ever experienced while drinking. Story 55. I tried caviar and it was very strange. Tasted like a dirty fish tank. Everyone else around me loved it, but to be honest, I think they were under the influence of something. So maybe, for them, it was amazing. For me, it tasted like I was licking a fish tank. Story 56. Worst drink. Sunny D tastes like rotten orange juice. Worst food. Thanksgiving at a white family's house. The turkey was so dry. Story 57. Raw capsicum, also known as peppers, is the only food I won't eat. You would be hard-pressed to find something I won't try. I can't even describe the taste. It's simply an assault on my taste buds. The strange thing is that roasted capsicum is one of my favorite foods. Story 58. Cliché, but Brussels sprouts are genuinely the only thing I have never been able to tolerate without gagging. They taste like a rotting ball of pure bitterness. Story 59. Coca-Cola. I don't have any problem with drinks, but it's not about taste. It's about how you feel after drinking it. When it comes to this beverage or similar types, they can be unpleasant after consumption. I know many will disagree, but everyone has different tastes. Story 60. Anchovies, rot with salt. I shuddered periodically for the rest of the evening and part of the next day, and I shuddered again just now. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.